Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today on this webinar by Justice for All. And Justice for All is a human rights organization that is based in Chicago. And Justice for All advocates for human rights causes both in the United States and also across the world. So, one such human rights cause that often is marginalized when people speak of human rights, when people speak of occupations, when people speak of stories of oppression and resistance, one story usually gets obfuscated or erased or marginalized. And that story is the story of Kashmir, one of the most prolonged cases of military occupation in the world, battling India's occupation for the past 7 decades. Now, as in the case of any other military occupation, there are people on the ground in Kashmir who are resisting the occupation, and then there are those who are actively resisting India's erasure and repression of the reality of life in Kashmir and the Kashmiri memory and the Kashmiri history and the tales of oppression. And these are the journalists and the human rights defenders, Kashmiri human rights defenders, who document apologies, who document the human rights violations that occur in Kashmir. One such human rights defender is Khurram Parvez, and today we would be talking about him, who has been in prison for the past 5 to 6 years and continues to be in illegal arbitrary detention only because he is resisting India's erasure of truth in Kashmir. So I would begin by inviting our first speaker, Dr. Ather Zia, to speak on this topic. Dr. Ather Zia is a poet and a political anthropologist who teaches anthropology and gender studies at University of Northern Colorado. She's also the author of Resisting Disappearance, Military Occupation and Women's Activism in Kashmir. She's founder editor of Kashmir Lit and co-founder of Critical Kashmir Studies. Dr. Ather, please um, enlighten us about the case of Khurram Parvez and the story.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, and thank you so much, Justice for All, for convening this panel and to commemorate Khurram's 3-year arbitrary, unlawful detention. And I think when we talk about Khurram, it's a very symbolic case of what's happening in Kashmir, the whole idea of repression, the environment of repression that has been created through various laws that can be termed as draconian, and also the military occupation atop it. So they create these possibilities and conditions in which people like Khurram, who are human rights defenders, they are basically the propounders of international law inside Kashmir. And Khurram's work, I can speak to his work personally, having known him for almost 30 years now, through the studentship and then also, as a human rights defender. His motivation is to document and research the Kashmiri situation, and that's what he's been doing. And he's kind of been one of the forerunners of human rights movement inside Kashmir. So in that sense, we can see the kind of support that he's getting, the kind of conversations that are around his work, and the solidarity that is being shown, and how many the UN statements, and also Khurram still is the president of AFAD, which is the Philippines-based organization for the disappeared. Then he's also part of the FID, which is another international human rights organization. He's a deputy general secretary. Even while he's in jail, these organizations are making it very clear that they believe in Khurram's mission and the work and the veracity of it and the truth that he upholds inside Kashmir and through his work, but also the solidarity work that he has done across the world, especially when we talk about landmine bans, and that he was a bridge in that situation in that time, a very visionary act that he did, during which he was supporting the landmine bans. And we know that Kashmir has a huge issue with landmines and the way they are spread across the frontier regions. So looking at his work, he should not be in jail. He should be out. He should be doing the documentation work that he does. And I think not having him in circulation inside is a terrible loss. I do not want to talk to India's democracy because I do not believe India is a democracy within Kashmir. It is a military occupation. It is unlawfully holding on to the region. And but I do want to kind of like talk about democratic values that Khurram is trying to propagate inside Kashmir, which is the possibility of documenting in the best possible manner, talking about human rights abuses and violations that occur, and also getting some sort of redress for the people, which in this moment is completely gone. There is a complete erasure of human rights movement. And as I said earlier, Khurram is the tip of the iceberg, and there are many political prisoners, both who are connected to the resistance politics and both who are connected to human rights defense. But then there's also journalists that have been under detention. Currently, there are more than, I think the documented cases are about like 400-500 cases of political prisoners across India, that they're not even inside Kashmir. They have been thrown out from there. And that also creates another situation with the families. The families cannot afford to always go and meet these prisoners. And Khurram is an amputee. He has several health issues as well. And we know about other political prisoners as well who are Kashmiri who have the same situation. And with Khurram's case specifically, he requires prosthetics that need to be taken care of. There is treatment connected to it. And he is facing those situations from day to day. And on the other hand, he's also outside. He's lodged in Rohini jail, which is one of the most overcrowded jails in India. So his family cannot visit him as they would like. He has two small children. He has a mother. His father passed away just, I think, right before his detention. And his mother also has health issues. So he's technically the sole responsible figure for his family of 4 people. And that also creates another situation. So when I'm talking about Khurram, I'm also speaking for other political prisoners who are facing this similar situation. Now, we also know there is this eyewash, there is this whitewashing of Indian military occupation by holding off local electoral politics, the process that was very recently concluded. And now Kashmir, which is a union territory directly ruled by this nominated official of the ruling government, who's known as the lieutenant colonel. Yeah, I think that's what the nomenclature is. But he's technically a viceroy, just like the British had viceroys. He's a viceroy inside Kashmir, and now they have this politics, the weaponization of democratic symbolics. That the election was concluded, and now we have the local government. We all know that they do not have a lot of powers, and what they are now fighting for, their fight has been undermined, and it's kind of like brought to the fact that now they are fighting for the statehood. And they have yesterday talked about political prisoners, and this was one of the questions that was posed to them, because Khurram's case is visibly a case of arbitrary detention, and many people are, throwing their weight behind it because it's very visible. The kind of work that he does put government of India in negative light internationally as well as regionally. And then the veracity of the work, the kind of evidence that is provided, also goes against the army, the violations that have been done. So you can kind of see a lot of people wanting to talk about it also inside Kashmir. So this question was posed to the new chief minister, Omar Abdullah, and he kind of like the irony is that now they're saying that they're going to fight the cases of political prisoners, the Kashmiri political prisoners, after they get the statehood. So, and we all know the statehood for Kashmir that is being created as a new struggle, as if that's going to give something to Kashmiris, is linked to this ideal of releasing political prisoners. And we know by and large how difficult for them it is to retain statehood, get that back. And statehood doesn't only mean statehood, it also means what happens to autonomy. Is it going to become an autonomous unit again? Or is the territorial sovereignty of people going to be returned? So that's also another question. But we also know that they have kind of like, India has played this very, the sinister machinations in which they're trying to dilute the movement for self-determination and independence into the retention for and retrieval of statehood. And this very new development that is just like in the last 24 hours, talking about political prisoners, and the statistics that they're giving is they're around like 400, but I think number is way larger, as Amnesty International has documented some years back. And we all know that Amnesty International is not operational inside India anymore, and not inside Kashmir for certain. So now they're connecting the question of releasing of political prisoners to the question of retention of retaining and retrieval of statehood. So that kind of like looks like as if they're trying to really create an impediment to the cases like Khurram and other political prisoners who are there and who are connected to resistance and also to human rights defense and also to journalism. So, speaking to Khurram's case directly, I think there is a solidarity movement internationally that is recognizing Khurram's work and recognizing this arbitrary, unlawful detention. And I think here today we have gathered to talk about Khurram, but also use his case as a symbolic for the larger repression, the larger occupation of Kashmir, and to talk about what kind of ways we can forge solidarities so that we can raise awareness about these cases and also for Kashmir by and large. So those will be my brief comments. I think we have spoken about this for the last 3 years about Khurram every year. We publish articles, we have statements. There is a free Khurram campaign. So there were two campaigns around Khurram. One was in 2016 when he was stopped from going to Geneva, and then he was detained for some days. And we had a campaign then as well, but then he was released. And this time around, we have a new campaign that has been on for the last 3 years. And every year we are receiving solidarity. We are receiving a lot of allyship from people around his release. But we are hoping that his release and the solidarity we are getting is also kind of highlighting the issue of Kashmir and also the issue of other political prisoners. They also require as much highlight as he does, and he would have done the same if we ask him, and if he was out, he would be doing the same for someone else, and he would be kind of using to mobilize this momentum that we have around Khurram for other people as well. And then his own case, which is being propagated by the Free Khurram campaign, I feel like that is a place to go and see what kind of solidarity can be done. We do have a packet. We have a full set of materials if you want to show solidarity on social media, if you want to do statements. So we do have that packet, and we have links on our social media on Twitter and on Instagram. It's by the name of Free Khurram Campaign 2021. I can also leave links for that. And I'm happy to answer questions about Khurram and larger issues of political prisoners inside Kashmir and other political prisoners as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ather. I'm aware of the fact that when it comes to Khurram's case, you have been very actively working on it and documenting the abuses of the Indian state against him. And it's a typical example of how the Indian state not only seeks to erase the truth in Kashmir, but then anybody who tries to prevent this erasure, anybody who tries to present the truth as it is, they are also not allowed to roam freely, because in some ways they are the carriers of truth. So the people who Khurram spent his life working on, they are in prison. And after imprisoning them, the Indian state also imprisoned him because they did not want the truth to come out. So obviously now it is our duty to continue to talk about him and to talk about those people who formed the case histories in his documentation work as well. So moving on, I would like to invite our second speaker today, Dr. Imtiaz Khan, somebody who has been working on Kashmir and talking about Kashmir for a very long time, and one of the senior people in the Kashmiri activism scene. And he is a professor and and a scholar at George Washington University, and he has actively worked on the Kashmiri cause in diaspora. I would invite Dr. Imtiaz Khan to speak on Khurram and tell us his insights about what he personally has learned from Khurram's struggle and what his thoughts are on his imprisonment and Indian state's repression of Khurram.
Uh, Thank you very much. And I'm grateful to the hosts for providing me the opportunity. And I think Dr. Ather Zia, who knows Khurram very well, actually, I have heard her name through Khurram Parvez when I met him for the first time. That was in 2015 when he was preparing this report, Structure of Violence, for which was one of the causes why he was put behind the bars. A great human rights activist who is acknowledged internationally. I don't need to speak more about that. Dr. Ather Zia did a very excellent job in doing that. He has received a number of awards, and even when he was threatened multiple times, he was offered that he should move out of the Kashmir and settle somewhere in West, where it was very easy. But his commitment to highlighting the gross human rights atrocities committed by the barbarous Indian government, he wanted to document it. And yesterday I was going through it again after some time, and I see how well this is documented. And it is not surprising that Indian government faced embarrassment, because 10 days before he was arrested, Amit Shah told that they have to come heavily upon the civil society. The problem which we have to understand, what Indian government is doing, they are not allowing the press. They are not allowing, they are putting that as garb of that normalcy. I remember there was when they were holding this 2020 in Kashmir, and there was one Indian journalist who interviewed few people, and all of them refused. And there was one person who mustered the courage. He said that if I talk to you, then the army will land up in my house, they will molest my woman, destroy my property, and I could be killed. That is the kind of repression Indian government has unleashed on the people of Kashmir. And Khurram was a voice. The way he documented each and every case, Indian government faced international embarrassment. That's what they don't want. They want to portray to the world they have conducted elections, which are false elections, and whom they have put in. Again, Dr. Ather Zia mentioned Umar Abdullah. Are we trusting Umar Abdullah? Umar Abdullah is the person who has no moral character. He said after 2019, when this abrogation of Article 370 took place, that he will never fight election in his life. And after a few years, his father, Farooq Abdullah, another lackey of government of India, said that they made a mistake by not fighting the municipal elections. These people, she mentioned it's Lieutenant Governor, who's a sort of wife, Manoj Sinha, who clearly said after the election, the law and order of Kashmir is in the hands of government of India. And they are not ashamed of themselves talking about statehood. People of Kashmir don't demand statehood. They don't demand, even autonomy is not the final goal. Our goal is the plebiscite. This was although the reign of terrorism, state terrorism, was unleashed even by Congress government. And we are talking about Indian judicial system. Look at Afzal Guru. There was this police sub-inspector who hijacked him to Delhi and made him to rent that quarter. And finally, they issued under the Farasial case, they issued a death sentence. And the Chief Justice of India says that there is not a conclusive evidence that he has committed the crime, but we are fulfilling the collective conscience of the Indian majority. The problem is that it is good to conduct these webinars and we should speak. But unfortunately, Indian government has succeeded in portraying itself that it is a democratic country, that things in Kashmir are reaching towards normalcy. We talk about Khurram Parvez. We should have approach at the educational institutions. In England, there are some Kashmiri members of parliaments. Why can't we have seminars for Khurram Parvez? We should distribute T-shirts free Khurram Parvez. How many of the university students in West or people know about Khurram Parvez? I myself am frustrated because I don't know where his case is right now. There is a gentleman, a friend who visits Kashmir, and he used to meet Khurram and visit his house. He told me when he was last time, I said, where does his case stand? He said he couldn't go to his house because he was advised not to go there because it is surrounded by the people from intelligence and he will get into trouble. Commemorating his anniversary of his imprisonment is fine, talking, but question, we have not been able to internationalize this issue. How many congressmen or senators have spoken about Khurram Parvez? How many British parliamentarians have spoken about Khurram Parvez? How many seminars we have held for the sake of Khurram Parvez? I am board member of World Kashmiri Awareness. We sometimes once or twice a year, we put digital trucks out highlighting the issue of Khurram Parvez and Yasin Malik. But will that cut the ice? Indian judicial system, as far as Kashmir, they are kangaroo courts. The justice will not be delivered. The judgment will not be written in the court. It will come from NIA or from the Home Department. And we know what the judgment will be. Unless the pressure is put on India, they will not budge. The problem is that if what they have done, they have throttled the voices who are just pointing out the injustice committed on them. Like Ather Zia said, it is not thousands of people having the young boys who have no resources. They are in jail. Their kids and kin cannot even visit them. They don't know which jail they are in. But case of Khurram Parvez would be sort of an example that if there's a semblance of justice being implemented in his case, then probably the other may have hope. Let us not kid ourselves. Let us not be under false pretension that you cannot expect any justice from India. Even from the earlier setup, I'm not, okay, Congress government was less, maybe I would say less ruthless, but this government is, the plan is, well hashed out plan, to eliminate the Muslim majority status of Kashmir and take over it and take care of the problem once for all. But are we knocking at the right doors? Do we have a strategy how to counter these nefarious designs of the present barbaric Indian government? So I think unless we internationalize the issue, take our voices to the academic institutions, educate the West what is going on in India, and especially with the credentials of Khurram Parvez, who is internationally recognized, who still gets awards for his work on human rights activities. And unless we educate the people, we are not, I think even I'm equally guilty as anybody else. We are not doing that. These occasional mentions or webinars may satisfy us to a certain extent, but it will not deliver justice to Khurram Parvez or other Kashmiris who are languishing in notorious Indian jails. So my message to my people and people who are actively involved, that we have to devise some kind of a strategy and work throughout the year, not on these token occasions, to see what can be done and how India can be pressurized and how international community can be educated about Khurram Parvez, Yasin Malik, and so on, other people. So that's where the bottom line is, that the message I want to convey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Imtiaz, for your very precise and also very impassioned call. And I think you're absolutely right. We have kind of engaged, unfortunately, in this, as you called it, um, a token remembrance where we remember people on certain dates and certain occasions, and we feel that we have done enough while the person continues to languish in prison and there is no actual strategic work or actual casework or actual legal work in terms of, if not securing the release of that person, because as you rightly pointed out, when it comes to Indian judiciary, it's merely an extension of India's colonial apparatus in Kashmir. And so to expect justice to emerge from within the occupation in some ways would be a very, I would say, juvenile thing for us Kashmiris to do, especially after witnessing 70 years of the occupation, and to see how there is no significant difference between how a judgment coming from an Indian court and a bullet coming from the gun of an Indian army man perform essentially the same function, which is of oppressing Kashmiris and of denying them their liberation. Both work in tandem, simultaneously supporting each other. So, with this said, I think this webinar, what it tries to do, obviously, is to kind of at least initiate or at least kind of kindle these conversations and to keep them alive. As we have seen in the case of Gaza, people are very quick to become desensitized, and that's why sometimes these conversations are necessary to keep something at least alive in the remembrance of people. Otherwise, things become normalized and routinized, and you tend to forget that there's something wrong to begin with in the first place. Now, I would like to move on to our third speaker today, who is a Kashmiri doctor, Dr. Mujahid Gilani, and he is based in Islamabad right now. And he's somebody who has been working when it comes to the Kashmiri cause. One thing that usually we don't talk about, though that is not the topic of the webinar today, which is the many people who have been forced into exile and displaced from the valley. And there are hundreds and thousands of people, Kashmiris, who do not have the right to return. And Dr. Mujahid Gilani has been working extensively in the refugee camps of Kashmiris in Azad Kashmir, in Pakistan administered Kashmir, and he has been doing activism on Kashmir for a very long time. So we would be hearing from him now about his thoughts on Khurram Parvez and generally the political prisoners, Kashmiri political prisoners, and what he thinks should be done and what is not being done. Dr. Mujahid Gilani, please welcome and speak.
Bismillah Rahman Rahim. And thank you, Ahmed, for taking me on a very important topic today. I believe the name itself rings bells for many Kashmiris and for people who talk about human rights internationally as well. Um, when we talk about Khurram Parvez, for me, I believe that Khurram Parvez, among the many other Kashmiris, is not a person, it's not an individual. Rather, Khurram Parvez is an idea which has intimidated the Indian state itself. For on one hand, we see that this person, this non-violent face of the Kashmiri struggle, has been behind bars for the past 3 years now almost. But on the other hand, we also see that under the garb of terror and regressive interpretation and application of the terror laws, the state is criminalizing what is an internationally recognized work. And essentially, the state of India has used its laws somehow to criminalize someone who is internationally recognized for telling the truth. The state of India has essentially put somebody behind the bars under the allegations that he is telling a lie, whereas the rest of the world considers that this person has been telling the truth throughout his tenure, throughout his writings, and throughout whichever investigative journalism he has done. I'll be talking about a few colleagues of Khurram Parvez, since he had been working with the JKCCS, the Jammu and Kashmir Coalition of the Civil Society. One of the lawyers who has been working with Khurram Parvez, Meher Desai was the name. And he quotes and says about the state of India regarding the Khurram Parvez case that the state of India has essentially been telling the world that the reality is only what is being told by India itself. Whatever narrative is being propagated by others, if it is in one way or the other conflicting with the narrative of the state of India, that is essentially false. That is not the reality. And therefore, what we see is the facade of normalcy that India has been projecting to the world and telling them that everything is normal in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So, is Khurram Parvez the only case that we are going to talk about? Is Khurram Parvez a prima facie for us? And yes, he is. For another colleague of Khurram Parvez, if I talk about him, Kartik Murkotla, had in one of his statements quoted that Khurram Parvez is one of the human rights defenders, the non-violent face of the Kashmiri struggle, who has been taken and put behind bars under fallacious allegations, under those allegations that essentially uh, have now put the lives of several other human rights defenders, several other people who have been working on bringing out the truth from the ground into jeopardy. What is India doing right now? India is essentially strategizing whatever it can do in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir against the people of Jammu and Kashmir in one way or the other using its own laws. It's not the dark laws, it's not the black laws, it's not the draconian laws that we talk about, the UAP or the AFSPA. It's essentially the implementation of these laws in one way or the other that facilitates the Indian hegemony and the Indian occupation, that strengthens the Indian occupation on a land which essentially doesn't belong to India itself. So that is the root cause that we have. Any Kashmiri who comes to the front, who talks about whatever India is doing on the ground right now, gets to be criminalized. Be it Khurram Parvez, be it the other political prisoners who are languishing behind bars for even more than 30 years. Take Dr. Qasim Fakhtu, for example, who has been languishing behind bars for the past 32 years now. So, this is the most important thing that we need to understand, that if we consider and expect anything from the state of India, who has criminalized more or less all the Kashmiris living in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the Kashmiris outside the land of Jammu and Kashmir, but talking about the human rights violations and the organized war crimes that India has been carrying out on the ground, are more or less terrorists. So, as we complete almost 3 years of Khurram Parvez behind bars, we must understand that India has advanced in its fight against the people of Kashmir by not only criminalizing the struggle, the armed struggle that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have been carrying out for the past more than 30 years. Apart from that, the political prisoners or the political representatives of the aspirations of the people in Jammu and Kashmir, India has now started targeting the civil society of Jammu and Kashmir. The journalists, the photojournalists, the people who have been doing investigative journalism, presenting out reports such as that of structures of violence and torture that were presented and published by the JKCSS, and Khurram Parvez was one of the pivotal roles in that. I believe India is now going to process further into it. And this is where we need to understand that a red line needs to be drawn. It should have been drawn long back when India had essentially labeled the armed resistance of Kashmiris as terrorism. It should have been drawn at that time. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And then it should have been drawn at the moment when our political prisoners were taken outside the state of Jammu and Kashmir and lodged in different jails of the mainland India. But today, when we talk about Khurram Parvez in particular, the person who has been telling the truth, not using the barrel of the gun or by political statements, but by using the ink of his pen, if we don't do it now, India is going to advance into other factions of our society, and that can be doctors, that can be lawyers and students who would be criminalized only for doing whatever they are doing within their own sphere and circle. So I will end my talk over here that we must hammer our and we must continue the claim that these people who are languishing behind bars for the past many years by now are essentially innocent. Innocent by the laws of the world, innocent because they are a part of a struggle that is internationally recognized and backed by the United Nations resolutions as well. Today, if we talk about Khurram Parvez, we must mark each and every day of the calendar where every Kashmiri has been criminalized, maimed, martyred, or incarcerated. Khurram Parvez is not a person. Khurram Parvez is an idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mujahid, um, for the things that you quite rightfully so brought our attention to. I think the lines with which you kind of ended your address, where you said that Khurram Parvez is an idea, I think that's a rightful way of looking at it, because what is Khurram Parvez today was Asya Gilani yesterday. And it has been the story of basically all the people who have, in any shape or form, tried to resist against India's military occupation in any shape or form, and by any means necessary, and all the means are legitimate for the oppressed people. All of those people have been crushed in one way or another, some earlier, some now. That has been the story of Kashmir. I think one reason why Khurram, in some ways, has been um, at the receiving end of so much of India's state surveillance in the past, and now very manifest oppression. It's not like this is the first time Khurram was detained. It's not like this is the first time since 2021 that he has been subjected to incarceration. When it comes to Khurram and his organization and the kind of work that he was doing, these people have been subjected to state surveillance and regulation and repression and intimidation for a very long time. And what has happened now is what was previously somewhat invisible, what was previously somewhat latent, has become very manifest. And I think it is therefore very important for us now, now that it has become so manifest, to still not see it, and to still not see the writing on the wall, which is that when it comes to Kashmir, the time to act is right now, and any delay could have very severe consequences for the Kashmiri nation and the Kashmiri people, is something that we ought to understand, because our people are currently languishing in prisons. Most of them are in their 50s, in their 60s, women, old men, ailing people, children being pushed to the verge of death in these prisons. Because in these prisons, the Indian state manufactures conditions where life is simply not possible, where these prisons effectively become your graveyards in waiting. And that is what has been happening with Kashmiri prisoners who, because of the denial of medical health care, because of the denial of very basic needs and necessities of life, these people have been pushed to the brink of death. And the jail in which Khurram is right now, um, because of my close intimacy with that prison for reasons personal, that jail is simply uninhabitable. It's not a jail where human beings can live. It is one of the most overcrowded prisons in the world. It has one of the most hostile environment when it comes to Kashmiri Muslims, specifically because they are the other when it comes to the Indian nation state. So both the staff of the prison is hostile towards them, and the inmates are hostile towards you as well. It's not just that the Indian state is hostile towards you, but when it comes to Kashmiri Muslims who demand liberation, who demand azadi, who work for it, even the Indian social fabric is very hostile towards you and also otherizes you. And that is something that we have to keep in mind. I think now I would like to see if we have some questions that people have asked, and then we can ask those questions from our panelists here. The first question that I see that is that I think Dr. Ather Zia could take this question is a very kind of practical question, which is what can we do? And I'm assuming by we what is meant is the people outside Kashmir. What are the options? How can people support the family of Khurram Parvez? Dr. Ather, if you would like to answer that.
Well, I can't speak for Khurram's family, but I can largely talk about how we can lend solidarity to Khurram's case internationally, which is going to in turn help family get him back. And so that would be my blanket answer to that, because I don't have a pointed answer because I can't speak on behalf of family. As far as I know, they're very patient, they're persevering, they're standing their ground, they're supporting Khurram in whichever ways treatment and everything goes, even though that all of that is very, very challenging. They're in Kashmir, he's in Delhi and in one of the most overcrowded jails. And Ahmed was very discreet in saying that he has an intimacy with that jail. But for those of who you don't know, his parents are quite famous all across Kashmir for the kind of work that they've done, and both of them are lodged in Indian jails. And his mom is in Rohini, I suppose, right? She is in Rohini jail, right? It's one of the most
Yeah,
overcrowded. It's one of the most overcrowded jails, and during summers they were having lots of problems. And she's a diabetic patient, and she has other health issues as well. So it's really a terrible situation. So overarchingly, I would say that from where we are, we can really keep the focus on the case. And is it okay, Ahmed, if I speak to a few things that Dr. Khan and Dr.
yeah,
Gilani?
absolutely. Yeah,
And it will also in some ways answer. So I really appreciate your comments and the passion and the fury and the rage that both of you carry, and the patience that we all as Kashmiris carry. And Dr. Imtiaz asked, are we knocking at the right doors? And I think that's something that as people, I don't like to say I'm in the diaspora, because it's not, I haven't yet thought about myself as part of diaspora in that manner, as much as I'm outside Kashmir and I'm doing this work. But people who have access to international spaces, wherever they might be. So I think we have to find those right doors, what those doors might be. And as we all talked about, and we structurally look at it, the structure of India within Kashmir is not a democratic structure, even though India likes to peddle it as such. It has narrativized it as such. But we know that it's a military occupation that is camouflaging weaponizing democratic values. And one of them is the voting process, the electoral process. I see one of the questions kind of like, why are we sticking with democracy? We're not sticking with democracy in that sense, but we are sticking with the weaponization of democracy that has happened inside Kashmir. And part of that was also India allowed, because it could have stopped all of these human rights activisms at the very onset, which it tried to do. And I just wanted to kind of like draw a genealogy of human rights activism. We had a 36-year-old lawyer in 1996 who was killed by Rashtriya Rifles by the name of Mr. Jalil Andrabi. And his body was found dismembered in a sack. And I'm sure like he probably was a colleague to many of the people who will listen to this recording at some point. And he was killed. He was murdered, assassinated, and then thrown into the jailam. And he was one of the earliest human rights defenders. When we talk about criminalization of civil society in this moment, it's because now we are very well versed in the idiom of civil society and human rights, because we have also learned the tactics of our colonizer. But early on, when in the 1996, Kashmiris were still grappling with what was happening. And there was this person, he was a lawyer, and he was going international, trying to internationally raise awareness. And then that happened to him. So he's kind of like one of the earliest. And then I'm also reminded of thinking about Mia Qayyum in this moment, who was the Bar Association chief. And he was also fighting cases for a lot of political prisoners. He is in jail right now. And I don't know as well the work of other lawyer. He's also, many lawyers are in jail in this moment who were fighting for, quote unquote, the freedom and democratic values for these people. They were, and then also, as we kind of like are drawing this arc, we are also dealing with the jailing of environmental activists, 5 environmental activists that were recently put in jail under the Public Safety Act. And they are labor union leaders, and they are kind of saying the most mundane things that happen in a very neoliberal, capitalist, military, industrial complex that we are living under. And I do want to draw attention that civil society has always been under siege. It's only now I feel like we know how to tell this. We are owning our stories. Kashmiris, as I always like, I mean, I always think, and I kind of see that we have been the most, as quote unquote, proud people. I don't think pride is a good thing, but just to kind of like get the point across. But we have been told stories of who we are as Kashmiris, but I think that our story was not ours to tell. We were being told our story by other people. And it's only in the last 15, 20 years that we are grasping at that idiom. But the other thing that I would like to say is that Kashmiris have always told their story right from the 1947 or even 1931. But the fact is, our idiom was not international in that sense inside Kashmir. So we were telling each other. But in the last 20, 25 years, we are speaking to the rest of the international community. And there has been a set of Kashmiris who have been active here in US, in UK, who have tried to work their way through the UN machinery in one way or the other. And it's only now becoming visible the kind of struggles people have been waging. And as you said, Khurram is an idea, because I see, and I'm so glad that you kind of like seeing it in that manner. He's my friend. And I do see Khurram as a symbolic of so many struggles. But at the same time, I can't call him an idea because I know him very closely. So when you kind of say he's an idea, it really makes sense because he brings all these struggles together. Be that civil society, be that thinking about self-determination in the most, quote unquote, the United Nations international law manner, and also bridging gaps and also trying to look at Kashmiri society, not just one struggle, but different struggles that people are waging. So he's always been open to looking at cases of even domestic violence, as we call it, part of that whole thing, that it's not just one thing that makes a human rights campaign, it's political as well as social. So he is, in that sense, he just kind of like brings all these elements together, but he's also part of this whole genealogy, part of this whole lineage, right from, if we kind of want to think about Jalil Andrabi as one of the earliest cases of when the Indian government really went all out. And the other irony is, in this moment as we are speaking, because there is so much erasure, there is erasure of human rights activity, and we know that the office of JKCCS, which used to be a bustling place, there was a lot of documentation going on, and it would keep active not just the local civil society, but there were also people from all across India. Khurram had solidarities all across India because the kind of work he was doing was really useful in trying to keep even the local administration honest in that sense in different places. So in that sense, his work is really meaningful. It really translates. So I just wanted to say this, that in this moment, what we see is there is a lot of assault that is on the journalistic aspect because journalists are not able to report freely. But on the other side, we see this very recent case where 5 environmental activists have been put in jail. And a lot of people seem to be surprised by it. But it's not a surprise at all because some of the people who were connected with these hydropower projects and also other environmental projects, they've always been under siege. And that's something that should make us think that it's not just one type of activism that kind of like is seen as threatening, but it's other as well, because hydropower, those power projects, they were called by the activists some years back as the India's new East India Company inside Kashmir. So, because they're stealing the resources in that sense. Kashmiris who stay in dark during winter, during summers, they reorganize and organize their life around when they will have electricity and when they won't. All of that power is going out. And that was called the new East India Company inside Kashmir. So it's no surprise to people who have been keeping a watch on it that these people are in jail. And it's becoming really rampant that anyone who speaks against the local administration, which again is comprised of many non-Kashmiris, and also then when people are talking actively against human rights abuses, such as what Khurram was documenting, they're all, when we look at this is an environment that has been created. We are inside a cage, and all of these are little bars of that cage, and we have to look at it together to see the military industrial complex that is upon us as this occupation that India has imposed on us for the last 70 plus years. So I get the way you're kind of like, the rage and also in some ways what we are trying to see with the international community, how to draw solidarities. And I think the solidarity for Khurram, going back to the earlier question, the solidarity for Khurram is already there. He's an award-winning, even very recently he won the Martin Ennals Award. So people trust his work. They know what he has been doing, because what he is doing is meaningful and translatable to so many other situations across South Asia and also other parts of the world. So the veracity of his work, we do not have to really argue for that, because it's there. He has the international wherewithal. So I think we just need to put all of this together to create a solidarity, so that it's not only redeeming for him, but also for other political prisoners, and translates very well for Kashmiris. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially what you said towards the end, was extremely important, and also, it would absolutely make no sense if we were to see Khurram's case or his struggle in isolation. I mean, it would not make sense at all. Obviously, for the reasons that Khurram was always worried, as you said rightly, about everybody around him. And it was not just that he was, documenting the cases of torture, but he was generally just somebody who deeply cares about his people. And that obviously reflects in his work, but also reflects in the ways in which he's remembered when I talk to the people who were or are close to him. So, and what you said about the environmentalists and their detention, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the reason why people have difficulties in grasping why these people were jailed is because we have in many ways reduced what we understand by colonial violence or occupations violence to just a few things. So whenever there is something that is outside of those boxes, we are usually surprised because, for example, India's occupation of Kashmir is not usually narrated in terms of colonial economic exploitation. Yes, it is narrated as in that fashion in some circles, but for many people that's not how they usually see it. And then there's also this obsession, unfortunately, that many of us have with the idea of development within um, occupation. So whenever people, for example, talk about whenever Narendra Modi or the Hindu nationalist government, they make this claim of bringing development to Kashmir, which primarily usually is understood in economic terms. What people say and the line of inquiry that people kind of put forth is not that they question the very idea of this development and what it means to have development um, from an occupying state, but rather the question that is usually asked is, where is the development? So people don't say that, there is no possibility of development living as a colonized people, getting it from the colonizer. But the question usually is that they are lying, that the roads have not been built. And I understand why it's said to kind of belie the claims of the occupier, but at the same time, we should be very cautious of it and to recognize what Kashmiri scholars are now calling, in the context of Kashmir, a colonial politics of life, where the Indian state is not using repression. It is using repression, but it's not the only face of occupation in Kashmir. These power projects also represent India's occupation in Kashmir. It's not just the military man on the street who represents India's occupation of Kashmir, but also these power projects that supposedly are understood as development projects. So I think, thank you so much, Dr. Athar, for your additional comments that you made. There is one last question that we can take. It's a very um, I don't know this question, hard to answer, but the question that has been asked is, will Kashmir be the next Gaza? So I would request Dr. Imtiaz if he would like to answer this question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Will Kashmir be another Gaza? Well, we know that there is a strong collaboration between Israeli government and the Indian government, and there are a lot of Israeli intelligence people are deputed to Kashmir, and this changing the demographic character of Kashmir, changing it from a Muslim majority to Hindu majority state is the idea which were derived from the Israeli intelligence forces. And when the recent carnage against the people of Gaza took place, and there were a lot of Indian volunteers who were involved in this massacre of the Palestinians. So in Gaza till now, 45,000 people have been killed, including women and children. And in Kashmir since 1990, if my numbers are not off, it is more, as some people say 130,000, but it is, some people say 100. Between 100 and 130,000 people have been killed. There are mass graves. Actually, in Gaza, I don't think there are mass graves. Now there may be, earlier there were not. And 11,300 women have been raped. So the plan is basically, what is the plan of Israelis in Gaza? Is to basically remove the Palestinian populations and take over Gaza and the West Bank. And actually, there are some theories they may want to change them into tourist spots, and that is the ultimate plan. Same is the situation in India. What in India, in Kashmir, what India wants to do, basically, they want to bring in the BJP government. And right now, we were talking about the army in India. It is not the question of the army alone. If you look at the, I wish we had some data regarding that. All the police officials above the level of superintendent police are Hindus. All the top level secretaries, the chief secretary, home secretary, are Hindus. Kashmir is right now governed by Hindus from rest of the India because they are implementing their designs, and some of which we know and some of which we may not know what is going on. About lakhs or hundreds of thousands of Indians have been given the what do you call, the rights of citizenship, whatever you want to call it. And like in God, they have settlements. They are creating settlements in Kashmir also. Lot of lands have been taken over because there is a rule in Kashmir that for security reasons, they can acquire any land. If I have a house, they can take it over. If I have a land, they can take it. A lot of horticultural land, which was a source of income for so many people, have been acquired, and they are planning, building Hindu settlements, and some of them will be these RSS who are heavily with on, like what same thing is happening in case of in case of Gaza. Yes, what Indians didn't do, they didn't indulge in a very quick massacre. But what they did over the year, they started killing people. And if you look at the numbers are even higher than how many people have been killed in Israel. Earlier, in case of Congress government, what used to happen is that if they would find somebody, a young person, and they would basically suspect he is involved in struggle, and they would take it over, and next day the kids and kin would get the dead body. Nowadays, what they do, if they just have a mere suspicion, they basically decimate the whole locality. And Ather Zia something mentioned about Mia Qayyum, and I wanted to pass about them that Mia Qayyum has been arrested, if you don't already know it, under a frivolous charge of murder. And in Barzala, all his property of his uncles, of his nephews have been acquired, and they are on the roadside. So we are reaching, why we need to, the time is of our essence. We don't have time. India is crossing all the barriers, and we don't know what will happen in a year next. Some of people tell me, okay, you keep on struggling, one day you will, but it is not going to work where we are right now. Do you think what after happened to Khurram Parvez, or what after to Mia Qayyum? There will be a person who will speak about human rights violations. Like what was quoted by one of the speakers, by this Meher, the attorney who is in Supreme Court. He says that only narrative they believe is their own narrative. Anybody who goes against the narrative, they are trying to criminalize him. So we have to, these webinars, we have to have a strategy. We have to have a strategy, because India has the greatest disinformation machinery. And that's what we are fighting against. How can we counter that? Unless we think about that, I don't think we will, unfortunately, we will not meet with any success. We can go on relating and relating and writing and writing. But unless the pressure is put on India that their actions will have some kind of consequences. Why India is becoming so belligerent? Now this is about the time. Look what they did in Canada with Niger. They killed him. And the Prime Minister of Canada says that it was done with the concurrence of Home Minister. We on these, and even in America, there was one so-called Khalistani activist who was targeted by the embassy, Indian embassy official. We can build of this narrative on these kind of realities, that India issues a statement, Indian Home Minister or Defense Minister, killing people in Pakistan, and they say that clearly, "Ghar mein ghus kar marenge." We have not tried to build our narrative on these brutal activities in which, and brazenly manner, which India is indulged in. And unless and until every day we think about, we develop a strategy, unfortunately, I think we may be able to write about, but will we deliver justice to people of Kashmir? I don't think so. Thank you. Sorry, I may have gone a little bit over, but.
Thank you, Dr. Imtiaz. I think we would have the final word from Dr. Ather, and then maybe a brief closing remark from Dr.
is raising her hand.
Yeah. Dr. Ather, please go on.
She's muted, I think.
You're muted.
Oh, no, I was saying that I will quickly speak to a couple of points. One is, we keep saying Congress government, and we are always like, there's always this transition to BJP, and how the way we look at Congress government from inside Kashmir, and I'm just reflecting on this. You've already said this, but just to kind of articulate it a little more. From our perspective as Kashmiris, Congress government has been no different from BJP. It's just that they were discreet, and they said this in 2019, that we have done the same thing that BJP has done to Article 370 12 times. But we did it discreetly because they didn't want the international community to get involved in the manner. Because we have to agree that in 2019, Kashmir was re-internationalized. It was already international. And India had completely repressed that side. But in 2019, it was re-internationalized. So I just wanted to make that point. And also the genocide in Gaza in this moment. So while I don't know if the questioner is asking uh, the genocide but I just wanted to answer this question about how there is a parallel between Kashmir and Palestine. And we have, as scholars, worked on that. Kashmiris know it. Kashmiris pray for Palestine every Friday. And these days, there is the Kashmiris believe in the politics of prayer. We cannot pray for Palestine, especially not in Kashmiri. They have allowed in Arabic prayers because Kashmiris don't understand Arabic. They can read and write it. They can read Quran, but they do not understand it as such. So that also shows the connection. So and then we have also kind of like seen, as you were saying, 100,000 and we don't know how many and mass graves and also what is like real killing is killing of people every day violently as the army has done, but also thinking about Kashmir as this biggest open air prison that it is, and it has been recognized as such. So it's a different form of killing, social deaths that are being caused every day by different things. And I would like to draw your attention to the idea of incremental genocide, because it's not only of one type, it's of so many different types. And then the parallels, of course, there are parallels between Palestine and Kashmir, but at the same time, there are many differences. They are both on the United Nations agenda, and now we know how neo-colonial, it's visibly neo-colonial, the institution of United Nations, but still just to kind of invoke it, because that is the structure sometimes we have to be pushed into, and we are pushing against it now. So there is that parallel as well, but there are also different places. But if we want to think through sort of neo-colonial elements, we want to think through how demographics are being changed. We want to think through the sensorial element of military occupation. Many people who visit West Bank, then they visit Kashmir, they draw parallels. It's not the Kashmiris who draw these parallels, because not many Kashmiris have been there. So, and Palestine, as I have said elsewhere, is Kashmir is a Palestine that no one is talking about. So all the elements of what has been the playbook of settler colonialism is prevalent inside Kashmir at the moment. And many scholars are like, oh, it doesn't fulfill all the idioms of settler colonialism. It doesn't. Settler colonialism doesn't unfold in the same idiom as it did on Turtle Island, it did in Canada, it did in Australia, but uh, it is settler colonialism, but it is under this neo-colonial garb which India is inhabiting in this moment. So that's what I wanted to say. And I also wanted to say this to the assassinations. I talked about Jalil Andrabi. The person from the Rashtriya Rifles who killed him, he got amnesty, and it was not an overt amnesty, but of course his government gave him a pass. He was settled in Fresno, California. And a Kashmiri journalist has also done a story on him. And then he actually ended up killing himself and his family. So that his name was Avtar Singhil. And the irony is that today in Kashmir, there is a media company that's going to make a film on Rashtriya Rifles, how it saved Kashmiris. So that's where we are in this moment. And I think that's kind of like an assault on civil society, not the physical assaults, direct assaults, visible assaults, but also the cultural imperialism of this all and the cultural genocide that is underway. I've heard that influencers are getting packages to go to Kashmir for 15, 20 days, eat, post positive stuff. So, but that's for another time. But I think that's where I want to conclude. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is how these things have been. I mean, when it comes to the last thing that you said about the influencers, it's not just the influencers. There has been an influx of uh, youth societies and youth leaders in Kashmir, people who nobody knew, all of a sudden find places in the front page of the newspapers, again run by the state, where they are portrayed as political leaders and social leaders and social activists. And it's very interesting how the Indian state seeks to create legitimacy for itself through these things, bringing in influencers. Recently, they organized a cricket match in Kashmir, where they had also, brought in certain international players, mostly retired. They need money, and India is willing to offer them money. I mean, so they were willing to come there, and then a lot of people showed up, for that match. And obviously, it's a separate story that many people were raising slogans of their favorite cricket players who happen to be from the other side of the border. And that obviously is a very seditious thing to do in Kashmir. But the Indian state, forgetting that part, presented these pictures of the crowd and the rush and the people showing up, as this kind of proof of people's contentment with what India is doing in Kashmir. Obviously, any Kashmiri who is aware knows that it's not in any shape or form an acceptance of India's rule in Kashmir. And more people are in prisons right now, jailed by the Indian state, than there were in that stadium. So, I mean, that is something that the Indian state, though, keeps doing on it, tries to show that all is well in Kashmir through a multitude of ways. So, I would ask Dr. Gilani if he wants to give a final quick remark because we are already over time, but I want to conclude with him. You're muted. You're talking, but you're muted, just what India does with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ahmed, once again. And I will second whatever Dr. Imtiaz and Professor Ather just quoted and mentioned about how India has been defining occupation in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The tools that India has been using, the strategies that India has been applying in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, be it the garb of development, be it actual militarization in the form of making Kashmir as the largest open air prison. I totally agree. And this is not just for the people living inside on the ground, that is. But I believe the diaspora, the people living outside Jammu and Kashmir, are equally affected as well. We, being the stakeholders, our families living over there, this is something that brings another saga to the Kashmir book. It brings an emotional touch to it, the chapter of the divided families, and how actually it affects whatever India is doing inside on the ground. The people living outside the ground are equally affected, considering that their nearest and the dearest ones are still over there, incarcerated, even living in the largest open air prison. And we really don't understand, really don't know how to actually communicate the pains and the woes. Just like Dr. Imtiaz had said, is it the right doors that we are knocking at? But I believe, at least as far as we as a committee are concerned, um, ourselves, we should be staying in touch and in communication no matter wherever we live in the world, no matter which country we are, so that at least we can share the pains and sorrows. We can at least share whatever the Kashmiris are feeling. And that feeling is what we need to project to the movers and shakers of the world as a human story. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all the people who turned up for this session and for listening to us. And I see some familiar attendees, people who usually show up. And I always say that the occupied people and the oppressed people are always marginalized, but Kashmiris are on the margins of the margins. So in some ways, even when there are communications and conversations happening among oppressed people, sometimes not intentionally, obviously, but Kashmir remains at the fringes of that conversation because it's not even seen as a colonized place. Now, that conversation is happening because of our scholars like Dr. Ather Zia and others who are kind of centering Kashmir in these conversations. Otherwise, to be honest, a few years back, India was seen as by many people, including colonized and occupied and oppressed people, as this leader of the third world and this leader of the non aligned movement and this very interesting success story of a post-colonial state that was able to rid itself of colonial domination and not kind of paying attention to how in that process it erected its colonial empire of its own. So I think these conversations are important, and let's hope that in our own lives we see a free Kashmir and a free Palestine. All these struggles obviously are intimately connected with each other. The oppressors are in arms, and so the oppressed people should also not just emotionally and in terms of affect be connected, but also should work towards developing a material solidarity that actually is tangible. And I think that is very important as well. Again, thank you so much. Let's pray for Khurram's release and let's hope that he is able to return safe to his family. The families of prisoners usually um, are, it's not realized usually how deeply and intimately incarceration of loved ones tears apart the homes and the families, and the most normal things become abnormal as a result of that. Because at every moment, you feel guilty for things that you should not be feeling guilty for, which is eating normal food, for example, a very normal exercise. But when you have a loved one inside, the same thing feels comes with this kind of moral guilt. You know, I'm eating something well, I'm eating something good, and your loved ones in jails are being fed things that people would not eat in normal conditions. To the degree that some of our prisoners, whose families I talked to, and the prisoners themselves who I have talked to, were served food that had pieces of glass in the food, which for many of these people caused lacerations and intestinal ulcers and other things. I think many of these things do not usually come out because, as I said, people are afraid to talk, and even the families of incarcerated people are afraid to talk because if they talk, they're going to meet their family, but again, it would be in prison because if you talk, you're going to end up there as well. So this is the level of repression where I swear, whenever I talk to families of incarcerated people to get them to talk about it, because I'm privileged to kind of be able to talk about it for different reasons. But when I request them to talk about it, most of them are not able to do it because they know that then it's going to create consequences and problems for them. So not only has the Indian state jailed Khurram, but they have also, by extension, jailed his family as well in terms of what they can say and what they cannot say and what they can do and what they cannot do. So I think that is something that we have to keep in mind, how the incarceration of every individual touches the lives of hundreds and hundreds of people. It's not always that, it's not just that individual. So many lives are entangled within his life that his incarceration is felt and affects so many different people. So thank you again for joining, and until, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.